Good morning again. Here we are to read. Every time I start to talk, lay down, hush, bad dogs. Every time I start to talk, they think I'm talking to somebody. Sorry about that. Lay down, bad dogs. All right, here we go. The message of the arrows. This is the one where it really starts to come together for you. I cried when I was born, and every day shows why. George Herbert. There are only two things that pierce the human heart, wrote Simon Well. One is beauty, the other is affliction. And while we wish there was only beauty in the world, each of us has known enough pain to raise some serious doubts about the universe we live in. From very early in life, we know another message, warning us that the romance has an enemy. The psalmist speaks of this enemy and tells us we need not fear it. He, God, will save you from the fowler's snare and from the deadly pestilence. He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness will be your shield and rampart. You will not fear the terror of night, nor the arrow that flies by day. Yet we cannot deny that the arrows have stuck with us, sometimes arriving in a hail of projectiles that blacked out the sun, and other times descending in more subtle flight that only lets us know that we are wounded years later when the wound festered and broke. One of the first arrows I, Brent, remember came on a fall morning when the green choruses of summer were no longer there to comfort me. I happened upon my mother standing by the stove one morning before school began, stirring oatmeal. She had been crying, and the tears still welled up in her eyes. They were not the kind of tears shed in anger or even pain due to a momentary spat with my father. They were not due to some recently delivered message about illness or death in the family. They were the tears of a frightened girl in her mid-20s who could find no meeting place between the life that she found herself living as a wife and a mother and the needs of her own wounded heart that never felt the connection with mother and father so necessary to living with courage and hope. I couldn't have put into words back then, but I felt the fear as a palpable enemy that needed to be quickly defeated. If there was an adversary in the heart that even adults do not know how to handle, my world was much less safe than I had thought. I moved quickly to help my mother vanquish this foe in the best way I knew how. I think I put my hand on her arm and said something like, "It will be all right." I remember feeling a separation within myself and from her even then that kept me from addressing her as Mom or Mommy. I didn't understand that the arrows were already inside both of us. She looked angry that anyone could believe anything so foolish and said something like, "It's not all right. You kids just don't know what it's like." My stepfather was not there to show me how to fend off arrows such as these, and so they entered me, and as I came to know, lodged in a deep place. Still later I came to realize he did not know how to defeat the enemy either, for himself or for me. This other message of the arrows that I learned on fall and winter mornings seemed as strong and often stronger than the message of those summer creekside singers. I remember sitting in the school cafeteria alone, trying to pull the arrows out, or at least cover them over so I could enter into the banter that seemed to flow so easily from my friends. I remember being pinned down on a playground by a friend of mine who was bigger than me, and feeling that I would always be in that place if I wasn't careful. I remember standing in the kitchen of our old farmhouse in my pajamas one morning at the age of 5 or 6 when two men in felt hats and long overcoats came to ask me where my parents were. They asked several questions, all of which I answered, "I don't know." Finally, they turned in disgust and said in parting, "You don't know much, do you, kid?" There were other arrows over the years that stuck in the same deep place, arrows that carried messages about ears that were too big, and the father who never called or wrote, my stepfather who was a cowboy commenting to my mother that I was a town kid, another stepfather who came and went and never stayed in touch. There was a girl I loved but couldn't love. Intimacy requires a heart that is released, and mine was pinned down by unknown fears and grief. And so I let her go, and total confusion over what vocation I would pursue or even had any ability for. The arrows flew, and all seemed to strike close to that fearful place, a place that said I was alone in a coldly indifferent world. And even the ones that didn't, I made sure they ended up there. I needed the message to be at least consistent, so the world was clearly a fearful place. I remember one day in winter, in my early 20s, going back to stand on a bridge over that same creek that had been so magical for me as a boy. It was 2 years after returning home from college. I spent most of 5 years there, still pursuing the romance through parties, alcohol, and drugs, and in always making sure I was present when anything was going on. I feared that if I missed any opportunity, the magic would come while I was not there, and I would miss it forever. And for a time, the arrows seemed to be silenced by the endless possibility that something was about to happen. College life had so much disappointment behind the illusion that life hadn't started yet. The arrows remained silent until a disinterested office worker placed my diploma in my hand without looking up, and I found myself standing on the front steps of my college administrative offices with no more reason to stay. I had graduated from college without finding a love or a vocation. The adults I knew, who so often try to fill emptiness with soul and economic solutions, told me that it was time to settle down and find a responsible life. Excuse me just a second. You guys quit. Quit. That's enough. That's enough. Stop it. My dogs are fighting. No, Augie, Bibi, no. I felt there was nowhere I really belonged or even wanted to belong, that whatever story my family and friends had found to live in, my own had become a succession of meaningless chapters with no plot other than filling the days. It was a longing for the landscape of those summer evenings of so long ago that called me again to the bridge that day. It was a hope that I would someday find some clarity of vision in the place that I had loved so much as a boy. I stood there that November day, looking down onto a small brown stream bordered in lifeless gray hardwoods and monochromic fallen leaves. The waters themselves flowed listlessly over the barriers of leaves and sticks in the path, as if wearied by the constant chore of movement. In many places, the dams built by winter debris stilled their life with little resistance. Hang on a second, I'm sorry, I just cannot see. I think my glasses are not strong enough. Oh, those are better. A few hundred yards off to my right, there stood our old farmhouse, now vacant with a large hole in the roof. The barns and sheds and corrals that had given it a reason to exist were gone. Weeds grew in tangled confusion where corn had once stood with ordered wildness. The weariness of it all came together in the silence of those absent August songsters from so many years ago. I remember feeling a sharp pain in my chest that I silenced with cold anger. I thought what a fool I'd been all those years to believe that summer message of this place. Laid out before me in the light of the day was obviously the reality that had always been there. It was time I stopped believing a lie. The mysterious love and lover that had come to me in my childhood were frauds. I know now that I placed the last arrow in my heart that day and shoved it cleanly through. I did it to kill the tears of mourning inside that would have insisted there was something I had lost. Yet the haunting was still there that day on the bridge. I only understood years later in a way that it was I myself who killed it, or tried to. If I had allowed the loss I felt to flow in the waters of my own tears, the haunting call of that long ago summer would have remained. It was in placing a dam of hardness over the ache I felt inside that I refused to acknowledge the haunting and even misrepresented the message of autumn. Something lost and again coming. At some point we all faced the same discussion. What will we do with the arrows we've known? Maybe a better way to say it, when what have they tempted us to do? However they come to us, whether through loss we experience or abandonment with some deep violation we feel as abuse, their message is always the same: kill your heart, divorce it, neglect it, run from it, or indulge it with some anesthetic or various addictions. Think of how you handled the affliction that has pierced your own heart. How did the arrows come to you? Where did they land? Are they still there? What have you done as a result? To say we all face a decision when we're pierced by an arrow is misleading. It makes the process sound so rational, as though we have an option of coolly assessing the situation and changing a logical response. Life isn't like that. The heart cannot be managed in a detached sort of way, certainly not when we are young, when some of the most defining arrows strike. It feels more like an ambush, and our response is at a gut level. We may never put words to it. Our deepest convictions are formed without conscious effort, but the effect is a shift deep in our soul. Commitments form never to be in that position again, never to know that sort of pain again. The result is an approach to life that we often call our personality. If you listen carefully to your life, you may begin to see how it's been shaped by the unique arrows you've known and the particular convictions you've embraced as a result. The arrows taint and partially direct even our spiritual life. I'm going to have to stop there. I can't see. I think I need stronger reading glasses. So I'm on page 28, and I'll come back to it later on. Thank you. Have a good day.